everyone across the planet to Connecting the Dots, a laser-focused, quick-fire interview on food and agriculture with international experts, where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakard, Chairman, Bharat Krishik Samaj of Farmers Forum India, as well as the Vice Chair of Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns at the UN Food Systems Summit. Delighted to introduce Dr. Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director of GAIN, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition and Chair of Action Track 1, ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all at the UN Food Systems Summit. Lawrence is a distinguished recipient of the World Food Prize and has held positions of responsibility at many institutions. His insightful, evidence-based research and advocacy have brought nutrition to the forefront of development agendas across the world. Thank you, Lawrence, for your time to join us today. Before we start, I want to ask you a question. You have tons of responsibility you are juggling. Do you get time to sleep?
Ajay, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Sleep is not optional. I get sleep. I don't get to do much else, but that's okay. I'm driven by my work and passionate about it, and so it nurtures me.
Okay, that's great. In your recent research, Selling to the World's Poorest, you have illustrated that poor households in several African and Asian countries depend largely on markets for their diets, and deduce solutions to improve nutrition and diet diversity in these countries appears to lie in strengthening market-oriented approaches. However, global, regional, and even local markets can be vulnerable to supply disruptions and to food price spikes. What is the low-hanging fruit to get farmers nutritious food to eat? We believe that kitchen gardens, backyard poultry, community markets could create more resilience and help end undernutrition.
Thanks, Ajay. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's two ways is a twin track approach. Markets are one of the most efficient ways of connecting producers and consumers, but markets need to be governed. And markets can be governed by the rules that are set by authorities, whether they are local authorities, regional or national authorities. And so where markets are not working well, and that means when there's too much power vested in some actors in the market, where information is asymmetric, consumers don't know about what the products are, governments don't know about what the businesses are doing. Where the markets are not working well, we need to make them work better for those who depend most on them. But there are going to be some places where markets can never work properly and where they can never reach. And so the other track is exactly the kinds of initiatives that you've said. Backyard farming, home gardens, small-scale poultry, really important for guaranteeing access to those who are maybe very distant from market, where the infrastructure is really bad, they're very remote, or in areas that are vulnerable to price spikes. So I think in so much of the work we do, Ajay, it's never either or, it's and. So yes, I completely agree.
Thank you. So increasingly larger number of economists now support farmers' demand for receiving true cost of growing food. Tim Bentham at the Chatham House has also said in a recent report that farmers not receiving true cost of food is also responsible for collapsing biodiversity and food systems. Is this in conflict with the idea of affordable food?
There's certainly a tension, but I don't think there has to be a tension, because when you think of the kinds of foods that are good for the planet and good for health, they don't generate as many negative spillover externalities for health and for planet. And so the true cost, the true price of those foods, once you factor in those health and environment externalities, the price of those foods won't go up that much. So that's one dimension of it. The other reason that farmers don't get enough of the final price of the food sold in a market, they may get 5, 10, 15, 20% if they're lucky of that price, is because there are so many intermediaries in between them and the consumers, and each of those intermediaries extracts a rent, very often for not doing very much. So we have to somehow get rid of the large number of intermediaries that are essentially capturing those rents just because they can. Sometimes those rents are enforced by raw power, raw violence. We know that there are kind of mafias that control markets, who can get into a market and who can't get into a market. So I think it's about shortening value chains, taking intermediaries out, and focusing on foods that don't generate big health and environment externalities, such as most plant foods.
Yeah. Great. So that gets us to the next question is, you have advocated for greater collaboration with the private sector on nutrition issues and the use of positive incentives instead of punitive measures such as taxation. However, in the year of the pandemic, we have seen greater consolidation of power and money in big agriculture, big food, big retail, that is agriculture input companies, aggregators, packaged food companies, e-commerce, and retailers. These big businesses have often entrenched interests that work against the public good, which you yourself had so rightly pointed out. Should a discussion on these power dynamics be at the heart of the food systems conversation?
I think power is at the heart of every transformation, every change, because change is about essentially a shift in power from those who have it to those who don't have it. So I think power is important in every domain, whether it's business, issues that I don't think are that relevant for the needs of the poorest. But when it comes to business, my perspective is not quite right what you said. I'm in favor of carrots, but I'm also in favor of sticks, and we need both. Okay. You're never going to get change just through carrots. Carrots is to incentivize the good guys, and sticks are to punish the bad guys and to make sure even the good guys don't lapse into bad behavior. So both are really important. And my argument really is, Ajay, if you want companies to generate more public goods, see, companies will say, we're not breaking the law, so leave us alone. So my response to that is, let's get consumers to demand different types of things, and let's make the regulation generate more public goods and less public bads. So I think we need both. We need to incentivize. For example, why don't governments generate nutritious food processing zones where they give lower taxes, lower utility rates, lower rates to SMEs that are producing nutritious food for domestic consumption? They do it for exports. They do it for crops that are not foods for exports. Why don't you do it for domestic foods that are nutritious, saving the planet, and consumed domestically? So there's a lot governments can do.
Thank you. So more voices than ever before now agree that the way WTO agriculture subsidies are structured have outlived their purpose and result in farmers in developing nations receiving lesser farm gate prices, leading to environmental degradation, human misery, and rural to urban migrations. Would you recommend, or do you think it is time to go back to the drawing board and relook at the way these subsidies are structured?
I completely agree. It is totally the way, it's the right time. I mean, probably 20 years ago was the right time to go back to the drawing board. The problem is the drawing board is not really available. The people who set up the drawing board in the first place have all the pens. None of us can have any pens to write with on that drawing board, and it's locked behind a closed door. So I don't think it's necessarily WTO subsidies. I wouldn't characterize it as that. I would characterize it as, you know, national government subsidies. It's the governments that decide what to subsidize. They decided to subsidize certain crops back in the 70s and 80s, and at that time probably was the right set of subsidies because hunger was the big issue there. We didn't have as much pressure on the planet. We didn't have this massive unhealthy diet problem that we have today. So, you know, in a politically frictionless world, you would dial the dials back and you would start subsidizing foods with a low carbon footprint, with a low greenhouse gas emission footprint, and with a healthy diet. But I think it's very difficult. So many entrenched power bases that are so vested in the current regime of subsidies. But I think it's country by country. I think it's civil society and consumers have to put pressure on their elected representatives if they have any. And I think I think we need to do it slowly, as 5% here, 10% there. And critically, Ajay, we have to say, what would it be spent? What would the money liberated be spent on? We have to give policymakers, policymakers only see the costs of doing it. They need to see the benefits as well.
That's right. Just one more question. That is, in the past decade, even before the pandemic year, it's been recorded that cases of undernutrition, chronic hunger, child stunting, wasting have increased. Why do you think this has been happening? Because the food prices have remained low for the last 10 years, more or less. They have been stable. But in spite of all this, things don't seem to be going right. And with your experience in leadership, do you think it's time to talk about right to healthy diets?
Well, I'm completely outraged. I don't know if your listeners or readers saw the FAO UN agency report from last October, where they showed that 3 billion people can't afford a healthy diet. I was shocked. I mean, I've been in this business for a while, and I was shocked by that number and outraged by that number. And I've argued for a right to a healthy diet for those 3 billion people.
Wow.
I'm not enough of an expert on the right to food to be able to say whether that is already encapsulated in the right to food. I suspect it is, but if it isn't, we should make it much more explicit. I'm just outraged. I'm also outraged, Ajay, at the hunger numbers are going up.
Yeah.
They were going up before COVID. They're going to go up even faster during COVID and after COVID. And actually, as Action Track 1 chair, I haven't seen enough urgency in the hunger debate, and I'm really worried about that. Hunger seems to be something we've forgotten about, and it seems to be unfashionable. But food systems need to be transformed for healthy diets, but also to reduce hunger.
Thank you. I think so. There's time for one quick question. When you look at this NASA rover Perseverance landing on Mars, and you have a helicopter that's going to fly on planet Mars, collecting, scooping soil samples, and they'll be returned to India. As a farmer on the ground, I see that there's not enough science to understand how life in the soil on Earth is interacting with each other. Do you really think that agriculture research needs to be reset? We need to do away with research and funding for monoculture and industrial agriculture. How can this be done? Like, it's funny, we're getting soil from Mars, but we don't know what's under our feet properly.
I think agricultural research and development is so fundamental to everything. If you don't research the things that matter, you will never advance them. R&D is the lifeblood of change, and I think too much R&D is focused on the big four staple crops and not enough on the crops that we rely on for nutrition: vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. Eggs, dairy, fish. These kinds of foods are really important, and if you look at the R&D spending, it's really skewed towards the big four food staples, which were really important, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But now the world has moved on, but ag R&D has not.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your leadership within the Food Systems Summit. It's inspiring, and it makes us all go on. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Looking forward to meeting you face to face sometime this year. Thank you so much.